Yo, what's up everybody? It's Manga Mike here and we're back with yet another video. Today's video we're going to be going over how to write and create a shonen battle manga. So there's a few things I want to say before we get into that. One, I really want to thank Kazart for recommending this video. Hopefully I said your name right. I'll always try to get videos that people ask for out there. And please, if you have a video, just recommend it. Again, I'll get to it as soon as I possibly can. The next thing is that I am going to be using a little bit of a different format. I'm going to try to read off of some notes that I created about this topic. If it doesn't feel right for y'all, just tell me below. If it sucks, I don't mind. I'll try to memorize or something like that. But I just find I'm stumbling a lot over stuff and I want to be able to get through the content a little bit quicker. And then finally, this is a topic that is a little bit difficult to tackle all in one video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down all the things that you would need in order to create a shonen battle manga. Then I'm going to do a complete series to discuss each and every one of these topics in detail so that you can get all the information that you need. Let's get started. So number one, I think that the most important thing that you want to think about, honestly, is your power or magic system. The reason why I feel like that is the most important thing is because it's what makes young teenagers really drawn to your story for the most part. But the first thing that I want to say about this is that there are a million ways that you can create a power system within your manga. So you can look at Dr. Stone, for instance. The power scaling within that manga isn't just magic or just brute strength or anything like that. It's actually opponents are defeated by advancement of technology, and that creates this really awesome, like, cool structure that people are drawn to because it's different, right? So if you want to create a system that catches the eye of your reader, try thinking outside of the box a little bit instead of just going off of some of the traditional stuff that you see in like Naruto or One Piece or even Dragon Ball. Number two, developing the emotional draw of your story or the emotional draw of your main character. And really it's probably and the emotional draw of your main character. Often stories from amateur writers, including myself, or people that are trying to write the next big shonen, they lack emotional pull. So to figure out what that could be within your story, one of the things that you might want to answer is what is important to you in real life? Or what is the moral code or lesson that I live by? The reason why that this is important is because you want to write something that is meaningful to you, and if it's meaningful to you in real life, or you can even reflect, if you're an older person like I am, on your teenage years and try to find something that was meaningful for you at that time. And when you do that, you're going to create something that was also meaningful for somebody else or other groups of people, because not everybody has the same experience, but most people do have similar experiences growing up. More questions that you can ask yourself are, what is the premise of my story? What are the themes of my story? What is the goal of my main character? What is the motivation for my main character to accomplish that goal? What is my main character's need versus their want? What's the antagonist's goal? How are the goals of the main character and the antagonist that ends with one another? I could go on and on and on, but I will save that for a different video. But again, the reason why this is so important is because without this emotional pull, you're just going to have a story about a bunch of beautiful people beating the crap out of each other with no real soul in it, and nobody wants to read that. So, going on to number three, and this is kind of along the same lines, but you want to develop your villains with the same care and love as you develop your protagonist. So most people in this world have a motive for why they do the things that they do. People who do things that are socially unacceptable typically have some reason for that as well. When you develop your villain, look at the works of like the Phantom Troop from Hunter x Hunter as an example, instead of Frieza and Cell from Dragon Ball. The Phantom Troop fit well together since they're a band of misfits that have deep connections with one another and even grieve the death of a comrade together as a whole. Versus if you look at Frieza and Cell, they are pretty willing to sacrifice anybody in their way. Well, more so Frieza, but they don't really, he didn't really care about who died and who lived as long as he himself lived. And that's not really something that typically happens in real life. So that's something that you want to think about. You want to make them feel realistic as well. Number 4, and this is again really similar to the previous 2 points, but I do think that it's important enough to have in a separate point. Have a developed cast of characters. Each one of your characters should have a significant role within the story. After you go through your first draft of writing, check to see which characters are actually impacting the story and which ones might feel a little unnecessary. If you're unsure whether or not a character is necessary, think about your story or try to tell your story without that character in it. Does the main plot, not side plots, but does the main plot change at all if that character is not involved? If the answer is no, it doesn't change, then you either need to get rid of that character or change the plot to make sure that the character is doing something significant. That comes with the caveat, that second point. Don't just keep changing your plot just to fit characters in. There's no story limit or what have you, or a minimum, I should say, of the characters that you should have within a great story, right? Some great stories have like 3 characters, some have 180. Anything within that range is fine, but you don't have to have a billion characters in order for your story to be good. So don't be afraid to get rid of those unnecessary characters. Alright, number 5. Escalation to a point is very important. You don't want a series where it just escalates out of like the stratosphere basically and it gets weird. So what I mean by that is you do not and should not have characters that are so OP that they just destroy entire worlds with the flick of a finger. I'm looking at you, Dragon Ball Super. Okay. These systems are destined to fall flat at some point because they lose the significance and creativity that makes up a good battle manga. Your audience wants to see the main cast of characters triumph using not just their overwhelming power, but their wits as well. Having everything in your manga surround just raw power of your characters robs the viewers of the satisfaction of seeing your cast problem solve in order to get through a particular conflict. So for instance, I like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 2 because Jotaro in that is vastly outmatched against Dio. Spoiler alert, just so you know. So, yeah, he's vastly outmatched, but he ends up figuring out a way to overcome Dio's The World Stand, right? The World Stand gives Dio the power to stop time for like 10 seconds, and he can do whatever he wants within that 10-second period, and Jotaro has to figure out how to thwart that, right? And it ends up being a very, very thrilling like a episode or 2 of them fighting, and it's just really, really satisfying to see Jotaro kind of overcome those particular difficulties or that particular conflict. Number 6, escalating stakes also is super important. It's not always the bigger the better. So, for instance, if you don't stop me, I'll destroy the entire universe. Mwahaha! Twirls mustache, right? There's no real satisfaction in that, right? And we can't really relate to that as an audience. The stakes have escalated to a point in which like it's just like it's unfathomable, right? Again, I'm gonna use JoJo's Bizarre Adventure for an example. The stakes are probably highest in the second season or second part of JoJo's, where it is Joseph Joestar versus Cars, basically. Cars is basically, he's like threatening to take control of an entire planet since he's become a being that's like just evolutionarily more powerful than humans could ever even imagine, right? But I would argue that seasons 3 and 4 have a more compelling plot and the stakes are much lower than that. If I don't stop Dio, my mother will die. If we don't stop Kira, he will continue to murder people. Those things, especially part 4 to me, it was so well done, and the stakes just weren't that high, but they felt even higher than the season 2 or anything I've ever seen in Dragon Ball, for instance, because the emotional pull, which is point 1, but 2, it had a more realistic feel to it. You can think about a murderer being in your community and being at large and nobody really knowing what's going on. You can feel that anxiety and that suspense right there. You can't really feel the suspense at like a person threatening to take over the world or to take over the universe or something like that, because it doesn't really happen too often within a human lifetime, or I would say almost not at all. Number 7. I know I say this a lot in a lot of my videos, but no filler. I feel like I have to make this point in like every video, but you shouldn't be planning filler chapters. Filler is not a necessary part of a shonen manga. If it does not have an impact on your main story, don't include it. Unless your story becomes so famous that people won't mind watching your characters do nothing for a chapter. But let's be honest here, as an indie like comic or manga creator, we're probably not going to have our stuff blow up significantly to the point where this is okay. So I don't mean to say that in a way that is like discrediting the hard work that you'll put into it, but realistically speaking, like, Naruto or One Piece or Dragon Ball, those things are like once in a lifetime things that happen, and a very few amount of people can reach that kind of notoriety or famousness, and you have to understand that they do that by creating really good pieces of work that don't have filler, right? So, number 8, understand arcs in general. So before you start to draw your story, you should have a fairly clear understanding of the structure of storytelling and how your manga plot fits into that. That will give you the necessary knowledge to develop character arcs, chapter arcs, volume arcs, and series arcs that feel really complete. I'm going to put a link in the description below on a great video by McKay and Gray, and they talk about the structure of storytelling in a very, very concise and just a fantastic way. I'll probably do my own video on it as well, but I don't know if it will even be as good as theirs, because it's that one's fantastic. But just as a general guideline, your plot should include an introduction, an inciting incident, rising action, a midpoint, and in that midpoint, your protagonist goes from being a little bit more passive to a little more active in their choices. It should have more rising action after that, a climax, which is going to include a low point, the reflection on that low point, and then a revelation on how to solve that, and then finally a resolution. And even your volumes should have something similar to that as well. Number 9, you want to understand cliffhangers and how to use them. So the big difference between this video and my video on one-shots is that creating a one-shot is much, it has more concise issues that you have to deal with as a writer. An ongoing series has the implicit promise of there being more information that you learn as you read the series just by the kind of medium that's being used, right? It's like the difference between a full-out novel and a short story. You can utilize this in an ongoing series to your advantage by creating meaningful and satisfying cliffhangers at the end of chapters and volumes that'll keep people kind of page turning. Now, you need to really understand cliffhangers, so I'll probably make a video on how to do a cliffhanger that's successful relatively soon, but please make sure you can properly use a cliffhanger. It should kind of look a little bit like this. There's a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter, and then an immediate resolution of that cliffhanger within the first few pages of the second chapter. If done correctly, it will really keep your reader hooked, and it'll feel satisfying as they're going through. You don't want to have a cliffhanger in chapter 2, for instance, and it not actually get resolved until chapter 6. That's too much time, the pacing's going to be rough, and you're not going to really keep your audience hooked because they're going to be unsatisfied with the fact that it's taken 4 chapters to get to the end of one cliffhanger at the end of chapter 2. And number 10, and this will be my final point, you want to avoid cliches and copycatting. It's perfectly fine to use cliches if you have a great reason for it and if it fits. You also want to understand that what you're doing is a cliche, just so you don't do it in a way that's been done like 100% the exact same way already. For instance, a cliche that kind of makes sense is once enemies, now lovers. The reason why that one makes sense is because as people, as we get to know other individuals and start to understand them, understanding that person also brings forth admiration, and admiration can then bring forth romantic relationship or friendship. As far as copycatting is concerned, it's perfectly fine to draw inspiration from other stories. For instance, like my webcomic Steam was heavily inspired by Trigun, but it doesn't feel like a Trigun fan fiction. So you want to make sure that you have changed enough of your story so it doesn't feel like you've plagiarized. And a good way to do this is to draw inspirations from multiple stories that you really enjoy and then discard pieces of some of the stories that you enjoy more, that you also enjoy, and then bring in other stories that you really enjoy as well to fill those gaps. So that was the video that I'm going to do for right now on creating a shonen battle manga. I hope that you enjoyed it. Like I said, I will go into depth on each one of these particular things, these points, and when I do that, I'll bring in more examples of other comics and mangas that I personally admire, and I'll break down how they did specific things and why it's important to kind of pull from those kinds of things and how to deconstruct that stuff and use it within your own shonen battle manga. So again, I hope that this was helpful. Please give me feedback on the format. Hopefully it felt a little bit better and a little bit more organized. But other than that, I'm Manga Mike, and I'm out.